Good morning, everyone. Good morning to all of our friends and colleagues and Hoyas here at the Healing Family Student Center and to everyone on Zoom. Welcome to our Global Social Justice Research Symposium. I'm Andrea Whistler, and I serve as Executive Director of the Center for Social Justice, Research, Teaching, and Service. On behalf of my colleagues at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, and the Center for Research and Fellowships, I am delighted that you are here with us in person today and on Zoom. Our symposium features Hoya researchers in two of CSJ's signature fellowship programs, the Education and Social Justice Project, a 13-year collaboration with the Berkeley Center, and the David F. Andretta Fellowship. On our schedule today are also presentations from members of our university's first cohort of Laidlaw undergraduate leadership and research scholars, a Provost Distinguished Undergraduate Research Fellow, and two Lisa J. Raines Fellows. You'll hear more about these engaged research opportunities before each panel from the faculty and staff who mentor our Hoyas. So very special thanks today to the Berkeley Center crew for setting up our technology today, Shmeng Tong, Imogen Johnson, and Amy Vandervliet, and the staff at the Healy Family Student Center for setting up our event space. Each panel will share their research with questions at the end. To our audience members on Zoom, please put your questions in the chat and they will be relayed to our student researchers from two of our graduate students. And now to Dr. Ryan Craig, Assistant Research Professor and Director of Student Programs at the Berkeley Center.
Good morning. I have the great fortune to partner with the CSJ on the Education and Social Justice Project, or ESJ as we call it, now in its 13th year of preparing students to conduct field-based research on local global initiatives at the intersection of education and social justice. The fellowship is a calendar year and includes a robust mentorship, an introductory research methods course, 3 weeks of on-the-ground research, and digital scholarship training for fellows to produce their vertical case studies. All of our past projects are available on the Berkeley Center's website. In 2022, ESJ awarded summer fellowships to 3 students who spent 3 weeks with institutions engaged in efforts to promote social justice through education in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Portugal. I would like to offer our deepest gratitude to the host sites for their hospitality and care they provided for our students. It is the work of our community partners that we seek to lift up today. Many thanks to Teresa Corosero and Sandra Fernandez at Fundação Gonçalo de Silveira, Christine Collins at Spring Hill College, and Giles Delaney at St. John's Beaumont, as well as countless staff, volunteers at these incredible institutions who provided contacts, fielded questions, picked up fellows from the airport, sometimes made them play field games with their students, always made themselves available for Zoom calls. I will introduce all of our fellows and then invite Sarah up to start the panel. Sarah Craig, no relation, conducted field research at our Jesuit partner, Spring Hill College in Mobile, Alabama. Kartikeya Unial based his field research at St. John's Beaumont outside of London, England, and visited several Jesuit primary and secondary schools in the United Kingdom. And Victoria Hengelbrook was based in Lisbon, Portugal with FGS. Sarah, come on up.
Oh, okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming out here on a Friday morning. As Dr. Craig said, my name is Sarah Craig, and I am here to talk to you about educational accessibility at my host site, which is Spring Hill College. So a little bit about me. As I said, my name is Sarah. I use she, her pronouns. I'm originally from the Metro Detroit area, and I am a senior in the School of Foreign Service studying culture and politics and creative writing. My concentration and my major is actually accessibility in higher education, which seemed like a natural choice given my identities as both a first generation and a disabled student. And I think that interest really led me, thank you. Good, great, thank you. It was that interest that really led me to pursuing the Education and Social Justice Research Fellowship. And my interest in higher education specifically is why I was so excited to go to my host site of Spring Hill College. Spring Hill, as was mentioned, is another Jesuit college. It is located in Mobile, Alabama, and is home to 1,300 undergraduates. And it was founded in 1830, making it the third oldest Jesuit institution of higher education in the US. Second was St. Louis University, and first was our very own Georgetown. So in exploring my research at Spring Hill, I had one overarching research question was, what characterizes accessibility at Spring Hill College? And accessibility is a pretty broad term. I'll go into defining that a little bit later. But in terms of methodology to explore this question, I primarily utilize semi-structured interviews. And I had the chance to interview staff, students, and faculty, and had a pretty even split between all three categories, which was really great. And I also had the opportunity to observe their new student orientation. 2 of the weekends that I was there actually were full of new students on campus, and so I sort of like shadowed all of the events and like sat in and kind of got to pretend to be an incoming Spring Hill student for a few weeks, which was really cool. So, as I mentioned, accessibility can be a pretty broad term. When I was sitting down to do some interviews and I kind of pitched my research question, I kept getting, what does accessibility mean in terms of your project? So for my research, I essentially just wanted to define it as the ease with which students can have their needs met, whether those be personal, academic, or professional. And one quote I wanted to share with you that I think really exemplifies my understanding of accessibility in terms of this project was from one of my interviewees, Eartha Lee, who's a student at Spring Hill. We had a great conversation about our identities as first-generation students, and she also shared the fact that she's an immigrant and a Black woman and how that influences her time at Spring Hill. And so in the case of Eartha Lee, when I look at accessibility, I think of all of these different identities that she holds and what resources and structures are necessary to support her throughout her time at Spring Hill. So that leads me to my first finding, which has to do with relationships. Across all of my interviews with staff, students, and faculty, the idea of Spring Hill being the people is something that kept coming up. And essentially, it's a very small campus. As I said, there's 1,300 undergraduates and a proportional staff. So everyone gets to know everyone very quickly. And so what that means is that the relationships across the different departments on campus and across campus in general really become the basis for accessibility and resources. And so it isn't necessarily this sort of like bureaucracy and like red tape of trying to access all of these different resources. It's really built on, I know this person in this department and I've heard of this person. And so when I was there, I quickly learned how interconnected everything was. And a lot of that had to do with, again, how small the departments were. And something that was really interesting to me was the idea that all of the faculty, all of the professors there are actually advisors as well. So if a student, let's say they have a family emergency and they have to miss class, rather than going to a separate dean or a separate advisor, to communicate that, they would go to their advisor, who is also likely their professor. And those are categorized based on their major. So a business major is likely to have that professor multiple times throughout their Spring Hill career in terms of classes, but they're also likely to have that same advisor throughout their college career. And those are just a few photos. Eartha Lee, the one who I shared the quote from, is on the top left. In the Awakening t-shirt. The next finding I would like to share with you has to do with transitioning. Of course, higher education in general is kind of in a transition phase coming out of COVID. But I think specifically in terms of Spring Hill, one thing that was really interesting was looking at how this transition is really characterized by an attempt to formalize more resources. So as I shared, I think relationships in this sort of like informality has been really indicative of the way that Spring Hill supports its students. But I think kind of coming out of that, they've really been making an attempt to formalize resources and to make sure that it's sort of institutionalized throughout whatever crises might come up in higher education. And one thing that was really interesting to me when I was there was learning that a lot of the faculty and staff that I talked to had either been working there for less than 2 years or more than 10 years, which was really interesting. And I think it was specifically that faculty had been working there for more than 10 years, and a lot of staff had been there for less than 2. And so in the context of the resources, it was really interesting because it was clear that so many resources had been entirely disrupted by staff turnover. I know that the counseling center, for example, only had 2 counselors. And so when both of them had to leave during COVID, Spring Hill was entirely without counseling services on campus for 6 months. And so I think that was really interesting, looking at those, these 2 people who were kind of holding like the wellness resources on this entire campus, what happens when they need to go. But in terms of these more formalizing the resources, 2 that really stood out were the creation of a TRIO program on campus and the creation of an emergency fund. If you don't know what a TRIO program is, essentially they are a national network of college access and retention programs that exist both in high school and colleges, and they're specifically aimed at supporting marginalized students. So I know at Spring Hill, most of the students in the TRIO program are ones who identify as first generation, low income, disabled, or students of color. And so I had the opportunity to talk to the TRIO director, who was really great, and he told me a lot about how the program is sort of developing. They currently have around 100 students, and they were kind of recruiting some more as I was there. And then I also had the opportunity to talk to the vice president of student affairs, and he talked about this developing emergency fund, which is interesting because he was definitely very transparent about the fact that they were still trying to figure out how to formalize that in terms of who gets to make the decisions around funding, how much are we asking students to disclose. And a part of that was creating this new software for understanding the demographics of the student body through data collection and admissions. So I think looking at transitioning into more formal resources in the context of these relationships was really groundbreaking for me, specifically not only in terms of Spring Hill, but my understanding of higher education overall. So those were 2 findings of many, many things that I learned throughout my time at Spring Hill. And I think going forward, I'm really looking to contextualize those more in terms of culture and attitudes around mental health and disability. I think a lot of times when I was talking to people learning about disability specifically, it almost felt like I had to read between the lines. And so while they were a little bit more explicit about mental health culture, I'm really looking forward to kind of going through my interviews again and really creating an understanding and analysis of mental health and disability culture that isn't as explicit. So with that, I would like to thank you all for coming today. Thank you to the ESJ team, my fellow ESJ fellows. And yeah, I'm really excited about pursuing the rest of this research.
All right. Hi, my name is Karthik, and I'm currently a senior at the SFS. I was at GUQ for 3 years before this, and now I'm completing my senior year and also doing an accelerated master's in learning design and technology. For my ESJ fellowship, in addition to being a resident table tennis coach, as you can see, I was studying the Jesuit pupil profile, which is a value-oriented educational intervention implemented across all Jesuit-run schools in England and its effects on student learning outcomes. My primary site was St. John's, Vermont, an independent day and boarding Jesuit preparatory school in Old Windsor for boys aged 3 to 13. I was born and raised in India, and I went to various schools that followed the centralized educational system. And our model of education, as well as the content of study, are very similar to what I saw in Britain. I was just going through our literature syllabus last night, and there were more English authors than Indian authors in the grade 11, 12 English syllabus. And one of the instances that I remember from the school was when I was at a verse speaking competition, and the student recited the same poem as me when I was in grade 5. So I guess that's what colonialism does to you. But going forward, my primary research question was to understand the impact of the Jesuit pupil profile on learning outcomes in England. The JPP is common to all schools in the British Jesuit province. As mentioned in the website of one of the Jesuit schools, it identifies the qualities that schools seek to develop in their pupils using keywords that unfold Ignatius's own stated aim of improvement in living and learning for the greater glory of God and the common good. So over the course of a month, I studied the relevance of the JPP at SJB in the context of the academic and co-curricular experiences of students. I also defined and analyzed the experiences of SJB community members as they sought to achieve the goals of the JPP. Before I started my Tolkien-inspired expedition, I was at St. John's, Vermont for 2 weeks. SJB is an independent private preparatory school for boys aged 3 to 13 located literally right next to Windsor Castle. And students mainly move to some of the most competitive independent schools when they're done with their year 8s at SJB. And these include schools like Eton, Harrow, Winchester, which have fees of upwards of £30,000 per year. So that was SJB, and I, in addition to SJB, visited 7 other schools. SJB was my primary site, and after SJB, I traveled across England. So my main categories of distinction were location, age of students, and the status. So as you can see, there's a large variety among the schools I researched. All the schools in the south, so those are the ones in yellow, were for boys only, and the schools in the north were co-educational. So one of the main reasons for that is the shrinking market for school education in the north. Another distinction was the age of the students these schools catered to, and their status regarding financing. So 5 of the 8 were independently funded private schools, and 3 were state-funded schools. Donhead Preparatory and Wimbledon College are adjacent to each other and located in Wimbledon, which is one of London's most well-off districts. But you can see St. Ignatius on the map, which is in Enfield. That's one of the more socioeconomically disadvantaged towns in London. Up north, Stonyhurst is considered the crown jewel of Jesuit education in England. Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings there, so that was like a pilgrimage for me. But right next to Stonyhurst is a small public primary school called St. Joseph's. And then I traveled to Sheffield. I did those 2 independent schools there, and then went to the Jesuit Center where I met someone from St. Ignatius. So for my method, I used a combination of semi-structured interviews and student focus groups. I met with a number of staff, parents, and teachers, as well as external Jesuit stakeholders across the 8 schools. My focus groups were mainly with students across all age groups. The one that sticks out the most was this one with students aged 8 to 9. And apart from the numerous constructive comments they made about my research questions, they did request for more frequent mac and cheese on the menu and more tables for ping pong. And 2 of them might have requested me to stay on to teach them table tennis. So before I jump into my findings, I'm just going to talk about what the JPP is. As defined before, the JPP is an articulation of the virtues and values the Jesuit learning experience tries to develop in pupils. You can see the list of words here, but I think the JPP is much more than these buzzwords. It's sort of a starting point for all school-related initiatives. So I saw the JPP being actively discussed in classes as learning outcomes. I also saw it as a point system for schoolhouses. So St. John's, Vermont has 3 animal groups, tigers, yaks, and emus. So that's TYE. And each student gets this tie card where you've got all JPP virtues, and whenever they do something good, they get 1 point. And at the end of the month, all of those points are compiled, and that's how the system works. So this is just one of many ways in which I saw the JPP being implemented. One of the students I interviewed said that it has a massive impact on their lives because it teaches them to adapt to both situations inside the classroom and outside. A teacher I met mentioned the importance of the JPP in helping students understand what is important in life, develop their relationships, and build a habit of self-reflection. Just to add a bit of English flavor, they did end up saying, "Gosh, that sounds pious, doesn't it?" Uh, One of the parents I interviewed said that she thought that the JPP was full of abstract language, but they were happy that their kids were able to understand what it means, at least in theory. And one of the Jesuit stakeholders who I interviewed gave me a bit of historical context of where the JPP was coming in from. And this mainly takes into account both the shrinking number of Jesuits in England, as well as the increasing diversity in schools, both ethnically and religiously. Uh, so moving on to my finding, the first one builds on my discussion of the interpretation of the JPP from various lenses. The JPP attempts to center the curriculum and learning experiences of students around values and virtues instead of making it about metrics like grades and outcomes. It was repeatedly mentioned in many of my interviews that the JPP seeks to create individuals who care about their surroundings and aim to do something for the world. My second finding was that the JPP affects students differently across contexts. For example, a boarding student has an entirely different experience compared to a day student because of the inclusion of the JPP's values and virtues in the functioning of the boarding facility. The implementation also differs in geographical context. As with private schools, students in the north usually shift to the private school that's near them, whereas in the south, they're competing for those highly ranked independent schools. A simple example of this would be how I saw all students from Barbara Hall, that was in Sheffield, move to Mount St. Mary's, which was another independent Jesuit school. But in the south, students from Donhead would not go to Wimbledon College, which was a public school Jesuit. They would instead look for more options that are elite and private. One student who did go from Donhead to Wimbledon, though, was Tom Holland, so that was interesting. My final finding is that the approach of stakeholders involved determines the importance given to the JPP in the school's daily functioning and the student's learning experience. So all stakeholders try to navigate between the competing ideas you see on the screen and create a balance. So from a teacher's perspective, they can either focus on helping the students build values and virtues or focus on getting good grades. This, however, could be entirely dependent on the parents who might want to prioritize their child's independent growth over their understanding of service and responsibilities for community growth. This builds on how the school might approach the issue where they prioritize individual success of students, like the number of students moving from their independent prep schools to schools like Eton and Harrow, because that drives up enrollment. Similarly, the Jesuits, on the other hand, might need to consider factors such as the reduction in the rate of pupils identifying as Catholic and the rise of students who are non-Christian. At SJB itself, a few people mentioned how the proportion of Catholic students has fallen from around 80% 20 to 30 years ago to 30 to 40% right now. And in the middle of these complex ideas and competing ideas are students who might be receiving different instructions from different spaces. Building on these observations, I'll further explore the links between the three findings and how the JPP has evolved since its conception across time and space, how the JPP influences students across ages and years, and how the stakeholders' perception differ across places. Finally, to end on a high, I'm going to play a video from my last day at SJB when I was playing football with the kids, real football. And just to add a little context, I promised them that I would do a knee slide if I scored 3 goals, so they just left the goal open for me.
Yeah, credit to the cameraman. Proud black boy.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Vicky Hengelbrook, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about global citizenship in Portugal. So a little bit about me. I'm a senior in the college studying Justice and Peace Studies and minoring in psychology. I grew up for most of my life in Panama City, Panama, and both of my parents are teachers, And I didn't really realize how much of an impact this had on me until the majority of my academic and professional interests were all centered on education. So that's what brought me to the ESJ. And when I started the program, I told Dr. Craig and Dr. Whistler that, I told them that I was learning Portuguese, and they decided what better way to learn a language than to spend 3 weeks in a country not really knowing much and figuring it out along the way. So that's what brought me to the Fundação Gonçalo da Silveira, which is a nonprofit organization located in Lisbon, Portugal. They were founded in 2004 by the Portuguese Jesuits, and they have a lot of projects dealing in a realm of areas such as promoting the relationship between civil society organizations and schools, strengthening citizenship education, and overall they work to address a variety of social inequalities in various Portuguese communities. And their mission statement reads as follows. They aim to fight inequality and social injustice through the development of a concept of global citizenship that promotes the common good and contributes towards change in situations that generate poverty at local and global levels. So after being partnered with FGS, I quickly became fascinated by this idea of global citizenship. I'd never heard of it before, and I really wanted to understand what it meant and what FGS was doing about it. So I decided my research question was to explore the relationship between global citizenship and civil society organizations among the FGS community and their partners. So like I said, global citizenship was an entirely new term for me. I'd never heard of it before. So one of my questions during most of my interviews was, how would you describe global citizenship to someone who doesn't know what it is? And this quote here is from one of my interviews from Sandra. She's one of the members at FGS, and she says that for her, it is a way to see our society, our own lives with a critical perspective, with a concern of linking the local and global level and being able to see how things are interconnected and how her actions, not just individually, but as a society, have consequences in other places. And so I like to think of global citizenship as a lens and a learning process where you're able to recognize your own place in social inequalities. And it's a model that's really based on respect and responsibility, which is why FGS works so hard at implementing it into schools and with students. So it's a relatively new concept, but it's gaining a lot of traction, especially in Portugal. The government recently put out a new strategy on citizenship education, which has provided a platform for FGS to implement global citizenship pedagogies into schools. So my method for my research, I conducted 21 semi-structured interviews over 3 weeks. Overall, outside of those interviews, I attended a variety of events with FGS, going to conferences at different universities, attending workshops, and I really just wanted to immerse myself into the FGS world as much as I could. And FGS takes a very hands-on approach. Everything that they do is based on participation, so it makes sense that it was through my participation that I really began to understand the nuances of what they do and how they do it. One of the first events I attended with them, they were all in a circle. It was a workshop at a university, and I sat outside of the circle with my notebook just planning on observing, and they quickly told me that that wasn't going to fly and that I had to take part in the circle, and I'm really appreciative of that because I think I really began to understand how they do what they do through participating, and it's really a testament to how FGS operates. So one of my major findings was in regards to collaboration. So on this screen right here, you can see the chalkboard at FGS of how they plan their projects. And they have various acronyms for the project that they have. And next to it, you have the initials of FGS team members. And if you can tell, no one is ever working alone on a project. And this is very intentional because collaboration is one of the key ingredients to FGS's methodology. So firstly, we have internal collaboration through this pair project model is really, really integral to what they do. And they're always open to new ways of thinking. They're constantly in this cycle of reflection in search of the best approach. And it's really a part of their institutional culture where they really value everyone's voice, even if they don't agree with what's necessarily their opinion necessarily. And this internal collaboration is similarly mirrored in their external partnerships. I think I don't think there was an interview where someone didn't mention how much they valued the relationship that they had with the people at FGS. And they liked what FGS did, and they liked how they do it especially. There was this personal connection that extended beyond the professional one. Almost every event I attended, they really were intentional in creating informal spaces where people would not talk about what's going on at the conference or the workshop, but just one-on-one. How's your life? How's your family? There were events where people's kids were there, and this level of trust, I think, really contributed to people's willingness to work with them. Most of the people I spoke with had been partners with them for years and always came back to join more projects. And then I also felt this. I don't think I could have entered a more welcoming host community. They really made me feel like I was part of their team. They took me to the beach with their kids. They showed me around the city. I mean, I really felt like I was part of FGS, and that definitely contributed to my motivation to come every day and to explore more of how they're doing this. And so my second finding that I want to talk to you about is in regards to a phrase that's called amor à camisola. So this is a Portuguese phrase that was introduced to me at a conference I attended with FGS, and my Portuguese was not amazing at the time, and so a woman was speaking, and there was definitely a clear reaction of everyone around me in response to what she was saying, and I didn't really understand. And so afterwards, I went up to everyone at FGS, and I was like, what does that phrase mean? Why were you all shaking your heads? And so basically, amor à camisola literally means a love to your shirt, and it basically represents this dedication to and passion and sacrifice for your work. And this passion really transcends an occupational sense, and it is your purpose, and it's one that you wear with pride. This is a shirt that you're proud to wear, and it also gives you a sense of belonging. People who you work with is a part of your identity. And so this woman was talking about how she had this amor à camisola, and it helped her to make change in her community. And this phrase is definitely a testament to Portuguese culture, and is really viewed as a positive and integral part to what people do. But then I quickly learned that it's kind of a double-edged sword, where a lot of people who work in the social justice or education field really felt overburdened and overwhelmed and undercompensated for the work that they're doing. And the pandemic had really exacerbated these conditions. I think we all know that the pandemic really blurred that line between home and work, and this was evident in the communities that I was with. And organizations like FGS really aren't given enough recognition from the government, both financially and socially, which leads to a lot of burnout and turnover in the sector, ultimately limiting the potential that they have to make change in their communities. So this is one of my findings. I still want to explore a few more, which is some of my next steps are going to be exploring in what other ways do global citizenship principles materialize in FGS's partnerships and collaborations, and then also how can global citizenship education be used to promote a culture of participation. So thank you all for listening so much. This picture is one of my favorites. It was on my last day at FGS, and they left me with a bottle of port, which I was very appreciative of. And yeah, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the panels.
Good morning, everyone. Can we please give another round of applause to our brave fellows? I just want to say that I wear my Amor de Camisola shirt today for my students here. I realize, I've been working with them since January when I started. My name is Dr. Judith Perez-Caro, and I'm the Director of Engaged Scholarship and Pedagogy for the Center for Social Justice. And I began my role here at the CSJ in January, and one of the very first tasks that I had was to serve as an advisor to these amazing student fellows. So I just want to acknowledge and affirm that I have seen their work over the past 9 months, and to see you present today as wonderful storytellers makes me want to put on that Amor de Camisola and really reminds me why I'm an educator. So congratulations to you all. I'm here to moderate the panel. I'm hoping that we have some great questions to ask the fellows, both here in the room and on Zoom. And Anais, can you please raise your hand? Okay, Anais is in the back. She's monitoring Zoom. And so as questions come in, Anais, please feel free to come up, and so we can ask the questions to our fellows. But first, we'd like to open it up to see if anyone in the room has questions. And Andrea has a mic. She's standing. I'm assuming she's going to pass it over to anyone who has questions for our fellows. We learned about England. We learned about Portugal. We learned about Alabama and the work of qualitative research. So hopefully we have some great questions. Okay, great.
I'm Chris Wagner, and I wonder if, about that high turnover, Sarah, that you have observed at Spring Hill College. So any idea why that's sort of happening, that people, at least for the staff, don't seem to stick around?
Is the mic good? Yeah, great. I mean, I think in general, it's hard to sort of answer that in terms of higher education as a whole. I think I wouldn't say that's a trend that was specific to Spring Hill. But I don't know. I think one thing that was talked about was burnout in terms of staff and faculty, and feeling like, you know, because so much of the resources and the support that students feel is based on these, you know, informal relationships. A lot of faculty, they felt almost as if they were giving more than they had to offer. And that was something that I chatted with the VP of Student Affairs about at Spring Hill. And so, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of reasons. And again, like, COVID really disrupted higher education as a whole, but I think specific to Spring Hill, it really was about that sort of burnout, which to me was what's kind of indicated the reasoning behind the shift to more formal resources.
And thank you for your question about turnover and burnout. As you know, burnout is something that's not just happening at Spring Hill. We see it here at Georgetown as well. And I'm so glad that you had a chance to see on another site how that lived out. Did you feel that it compromised the opportunities that students had to get resources for accessibility?
I think partially, in the sense that the idea, I mean, well, let me first say that Spring Hill, during the time that I was there, they actually were not fully operational. They don't have classes during the summer. So the only students that were there were actually the incoming students who I interacted with but didn't interview because, you know, I figured they had enough going on. But I mainly talked to the orientation leaders, and they all kind of discussed the fact that some staff members, they just didn't know because they hadn't been there for a while. And so I think specifically in terms of access, losing some of those like staff members really impacted that, as I shared earlier with my example of like the mental health counseling. But yeah, I think it was a little bit more difficult to say just because Spring Hill wasn't in its like full operating status. But I definitely think there was the sense of sort of feeling like Spring Hill was still in recovery in terms of, you know, having staff members and faculty members too feeling more grounded. But I think at the same time, students felt like they knew the direction that Spring Hill was heading.
Observations. Yeah. And I would say that Spring Hill is still in recovery, right?
Yes.
We have another question from Zoom, and so Anais is going to ask the question.
Yes, we have a fantastic question from Sonia addressing Vicky. How did the culture of work-life balance surprise you in Portugal, specifically in this sector? And what are some solutions you foresee you can resolve this? Absolutely, yes. How did the culture of work-life balance surprise you in Portugal, specifically in this sector? And what are some solutions you foresee can resolve this?
It didn't really surprise me, honestly, because I don't think it's uncommon that people that work in nonprofits are undercompensated and not given enough recognition. I think, so that didn't really surprise me, but I don't really know. It was really difficult to see how people felt that they had to they were rewarded by motivation rather than the recognition from the people in their communities. And so I don't really know what sort of solutions there would be. I think one of the things that I saw specifically in Portugal, and that is different in comparison to other European countries, is that the funding that the government gives nonprofits is a lot, they go by much shorter models, and so their projects aren't able to have the long-term impact that they really intend and they really need to have, especially an organization like FGS that doesn't really focus so much on the outcomes of their work, but rather on the processes and what comes about. And so I think one of the ways that was expressed to me was that there really needs to be a greater recognition that longer funding and that's less quantitative focused, I think that would be one of the ways to help strengthen the work that FGS does.
Thank you for that. And thank you to Sonia for asking that question. Hello, Sonia. When I think about what you shared with me in terms of what you observed in Portugal, I feel like there was a cultural component that you and I both agreed with, you having lived in Panama and talking about culture and having lived in different places. Would you say that their approach to work was culturally based, or did you feel like this is something that you've seen in other places, or was it very Portuguese in a particular way?
I would say there definitely were components that were specifically Portuguese. Something that I didn't know before going to Portugal is that they were in one of the longest dictatorships of the 20th century, and seeing how that impacted the culture today and the culture of participation and community action. It's a very much a community-based culture where people, like during the pandemic, a lot of people told me how the government didn't always do things to support communities, but it was really the people and everyone organizing together. And so that is one of the ways, I think.
Do we have any questions in the room or on Zoom? Great. Question in the room.
Hey y'all, this can be for any panelist, but I know these were kind of more individual projects, but how did you find and pursue collaboration while you were doing your research? And how did it help you? Thank you.
And Kartik, do you want to take that?
Before we went on our summer trips, we were in a fall course, 1 credit, where we were meeting every week and discussing how we'd be carrying out our research projects. And I think that really aligned our own perspectives as well, because we were approaching them from the same starting point. And I think the introductory course I think it was spring, not fall. but in the spring helped us find that common ground within each site and then build off from there our individual projects.
I also think coming back after doing our research, they were really helpful to me because we had to go through all our interviews and code them, and I'd never done it before, and I don't think they had either, and so it was nice to kind of be lost together, and with the help of our wonderful directors, obviously, but it was really nice to have their support, and we would go to Foxtrot and work together and be figuring out how to do it, so yeah. Great.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think for me, I was a little nervous coming into this fellowship because it was my first time doing sort of more formal research. So to echo what Vicky said, it was nice to kind of have that support of what is coding? You know, is it just highlighting and very basic questions like that. It was definitely good to kind of work as a group.
If I can just add something there. Last semester I was in Qatar, so they were all waking up at 9 or 10 a.m. to accommodate my timing, so thank you everyone. I don't think I've mentioned that before.
Yeah, no, it was great that we had that time together. So the Education and Social Justice Fellowship is a year-long commitment that students make, and they go on the journey starting in January in the spring semester, and they work with the directors of the Berkeley Center and the CSJ to really get more honed skills on qualitative research methods so that when they go out to their field placements, they're prepared to conduct research, conduct interviews, have the confidence to interact with people independently, and to know how to ask semi-structured interview questions. And so, we'll talk a little bit about the call recently went out. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the afternoon. But the students have been together for 9 months. And they were away on their site placements for 3 weeks, but with technology, they were keeping in touch with one another and sharing kind of best practices along the way. So hopefully that answered your question. That's such a great question. Thank you. Any other questions, perhaps on Zoom or in the chat or here? We're good on time.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I think it will be short. It's for Kartik. So you analyzed those Jesuit pupil profiles all across those 7 schools. Are those profiles shared? Are they developed together? Is there some sort of intention that it's sort of harmonized among the different schools, or is it just locally developing?
Yeah, thank you for that. So the JPP was developed by the Jesuit Institute in England. So before the JPP, they had something that was called the Jesuit Leavers Profile. So students, when they would finish school, would get a profile saying, these are the qualities that we try to build in you. And I think the JPP, when it was introduced in 2013, tried to flip that process by including those values and virtues at the beginning of the process. So the Jesuit Institute did come up with it. The differences I see are in implementation because the contexts are very different. And I think all of the schools approach the JPP in some unique way. A common sentiment that I did hear, though, was maybe it could be better for the implementation if the Jesuit Institute gives more direction to how the JPP can be implemented, because right now it's just a bunch of PDFs and the profile itself.
Very much. We have quite a few minutes, so we have more time for Q&A, so please ask some great questions.
Anais has one.
Oh, great, Anais. And it could also be a comment, right? We want to have a conversation and dialogue as well. Hello. Great. Okay, Anais.
Yes, so this is a question maybe for Andrea. For someone who is very interested in participating in this fellowship, but yet has not selected a particular case study, what do you recommend in this searching for case study process? What shall we go after?
That's a great question from a prospective student, and Dr. Perez-Caro, you can jump in here too. For this fellowship, Education and Social Justice, they are applying without a case study. We are actually assigning them the case study. We heard from Vicky in her interview process, she was learning Portuguese. And we were all sitting there and we were like, oh, we've always wanted to have someone go to Portugal, right? And so we utilize, as you probably have realized, our Jesuit network, which is incredible, from around the world. We've had fellows in, I think, 40 different countries, just as many sites. And so for this fellowship, we're doing the assigning with the community partners and with the fellows in collaboration. Now, sometimes there's restrictions. For example, visas can be something that we have to think about. Now, for some of the other fellowships, like our next panel, Laidlaw, that might be a good question for our Laidlaw fellows to offer, is how you found that case study. I could definitely understand that being a question for prospective students. So thank you, Anais, for bringing that up.
I will say to the student who asked that question, as a new person entering the process, with the students and my colleagues, the most exciting part of the ESJ Fellowship for me in the winter was when Dr. Whistler announced where each student was going. It sounded like they won the lottery or I don't know if you ever watched the show The Price is Right. It felt like that. Like at the end of The Price is Right, you figure out who's going to win. And so that is one of the most exciting things. One of the things we are exploring, but certainly has not yet been confirmed for the person who asked the question, is bringing the cohort of fellows to one location. They may be placed in different sites, but one global, possibly international location, and they will be going together to that location. So we're exploring that. Because of COVID, we cannot guarantee that. But Dr. Craig and the Berkeley Center has learned about different opportunities, and so we are exploring that right now. And from the little that we know, it's very, very exciting. So hopefully, anyone who's watching today or here today, if you are interested, just know that we are already putting those wheels in motion. We have another question in the back.
Cade. And just to say, that why we're doing that goes back to Cade's question about collaboration and cohort. Right? It is hard to do this and feeling solo and dropping in any of the places you dropped. And so we're thinking about how we can create even more mentored structures to support students.
Well, hey, y'all. This is for all the panelists. Thank you for your time today. I just want to know, when you went out and did that research, what is something that surprised you while you're researching or just on the field?
How much coffee I would drink in Portugal, for sure. They love their coffee breaks. But otherwise, my research question was actually really different before I went to Portugal. And I realized through my first initial interviews that the direction I was going in really wasn't that interesting to me. And I ended up going more towards the Amor de Camisola. Once I was introduced to that, I was like, I need to learn more about this and more about how it's impacting people that work in civil society organizations. So yeah.
For me, it was more about getting accustomed to the space. Like the first day I went in, they put me in the teacher staff room, and then I became good friends with all the teachers. I'd play football games with them, cricket. I even, they have this medal that they've only given to 3 people in the last 100 years. I got the 4th one, right?
Wow.
So having that kind of immersion in the site is something I did not expect before I went. I thought I'd just go there, interview, and go back home.
Kartik, you used a very Ignatian word, immersion, right?
Yeah.
Very, very important part of that process, right? That Ignatian formation and the way in which we approach doing this work. Excellent. Sarah?
Yeah. I don't know if it was a total surprise, but as I mentioned in my last answer, I had never done sort of like formal research before. And so I definitely had a bit of anxiety around that. But then when I got to Spring Hill, like the actual like interviewing, easiest part. I feel like the most difficult thing was honestly just like the logistics. Like for example, we kind of figured out in the spring that like I was gonna have to drive in Alabama, which was something I had not driven in like 4 years. And so I ended up spending like 6 months like practicing driving.
And Sarah's from Detroit.
Yeah, like we definitely drive. I just don't like driving. So I think it was a lot of the like, you know, I showed up to an empty apartment and like it was like, how do I furnish that? And how do I like live in this space? And like make sure my needs are met while also trying to focus on this research.
Exactly, because part of the experience is living among and with the communities that you are researching. I think we may have time for one more question before we wrap up. And I just want to acknowledge also with Sarah in particular. Sarah studies journalism and is a writer. And so a lot of your journey, which I was so honored to witness, was you navigating how to take some of those journalism skills, but modify and reapply them in a different way as a social scientist. So you're watching, as an advisor, you're watching your students grow in very particular ways, but you're also watching them go through the process of critical thinking. And for me, that was one of the most exciting moments, Sarah, watching you realize that you're going to have to write a different way, research, think, approach, interview a different way, but you can still honor the skills that you have and bring it to a new setting. So that, I just want to acknowledge that for you, Sarah. But can we give one last round of applause to the ESJ Fellows?